The ship came in crooked, trailing smoke and sparks as it scraped against the docking clamps of Outpost Meridian like a wounded animal dragging itself to shelter inside the cockpit. Commander Valis Sorenkai of the Kethvari Empire sat with her hands still gripping the controls. Her violet blood dried in streaks across her pale blue skin, and her breathing shallow but steady. She had survived the ambush in the hollow nebula. But survival was not the same as victory. The pirates had been waiting for her convoy, and they had known exactly where to strike. They had disabled her escort ships first, then surrounded her command vessel with surgical precision that spoke of inside information and careful planning. Valith had fought them off alone for nearly 6 hours, her ship taking hit after hit while she returned fire with everything she had. In the end, she had destroyed 11 of their vessels and scattered the rest into the void. But the cost had been too high. She looked down at her chest and felt the familiar weight of despair settle into her bones. Her armor was shattered. The crystalline plates that covered her torso had cracked and splintered during the battle when a plasma bolt had punched through her ship's hull and struck her directly. The wound beneath had healed thanks to her species' natural regeneration. But the armor had not recovered with her, could not recover it, was dead now. And nothing in the galaxy could change that simple, terrible truth. Valith unstrapped herself from the pilot's seat and stood on unsteady legs, gathering the broken pieces of crystal that had fallen around her during the landing. Each fragment felt cold in her hands, lifeless in a way that made her throat tighten with grief. This armor had been worn by her mother, and her mother's mother, and 12 generations of warriors before them, stretching back 300 years to the first Sorenkai, who had grown it from a seed crystal. On the day she earned her commission, it had sung with the memories of every battle, every victory, every sacrifice her ancestors had made. Now it was silent. Valith tucked the fragments into a pouch at her belt and limped toward the airlock, knowing that she had no choice but to continue forward, even though every step felt like walking toward her own execution. Outpost Meridian was a human station, a rough and chaotic place where traders and travelers from a dozen species mingled in the kind of uneasy peace that only existed on the fringes of civilized space. The humans had only been spacefaring for 2 centuries, a blink of an eye compared to the ancient empires that surrounded them. But they had spread through the neutral zones like weeds growing through cracks in stone. They were everywhere now. These strange, soft creatures with their loud voices and their cluttered ships and their absolute refusal to accept that anything was beyond their reach. Valith had never understood them, and she had never particularly wanted to. She stepped off her ship and into the main corridor of the station, ignoring the stares that followed her. She was tall, even by Kethvari standards, nearly 7 feet of lean muscle and sharp angles, with silver hair that fell past her shoulders and eyes like polished amber that seemed to glow in the dim station lighting. The humans she passed whispered to each other and pointed, clearly recognizing her species, even if they did not know her rank or her name. She did not care what they thought of her. She only needed a place to rest for a few hours before she began the long journey home to face her shame. The cantina was loud and crowded, filled with the smell of strange food and the sound of a dozen different languages competing for attention. But Valith found an empty table in the corner and sat with her back to the wall where she could watch the door old habits died hard. Even when there was nothing left worth protecting, she pulled the pouch from her belt and emptied the crystal fragments onto the table, arranging them with careful hands into something that almost resembled the shape they had once held. The pieces no longer fit together perfectly, warped by the heat of the plasma that had struck them, and gaps showed where smaller shards had been lost. For Valith stared at the broken remains of her heritage and felt a numbness spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with her healed wound when she returned home. She would have to stand before the Council of Blades and confess that she had lost her ancestral armor. They would strip her of her rank and her name, severing her from the Sorenkai bloodline as thoroughly as if she had never been born. She would become a ghost, a warrior without history, forbidden to speak of her family or claim any connection to their legacy. It was the oldest law of her people, and it existed for good reason. A HFY without their armor was a HFY without their soul, incomplete and unworthy of the honor their ancestors had earned in Velith, understood the law and accepted it. But understanding and acceptance did not make the pain any easier to bear. She was so lost in her grief that she did not notice the human approaching until he was already standing beside her table with his head tilted and his eyes fixed on the crystal fragments with obvious curiosity. He was not particularly impressive by human standards. Average height and average build, with dark hair that stuck up in messy spikes and grease stains on his worn work clothes. His hands were rough and calloused, the hands of someone who worked with tools for a living. And there was a smudge of something black across his left cheek that he seemed completely unaware of. "That's beautiful work," he said, his voice casual and friendly, as if he approached alien warriors in cantinas every day. "Never seen crystal grown in that pattern before. Is it organic or synthetic?" Velith looked up at him with an expression that had made generals flinch and politicians stammer. But the human just stood there, waiting for an answer like he had all the time in the world. "It is neither your concern nor your business," she said coldly. "Leave me." The human did not leave. Instead, he pulled out the chair across from her and sat down without asking permission, leaning forward to get a better look at the fragments with genuine interest in his eyes, rather than the fear or disgust she had expected. "I'm Marcus," he said. "Marcus Chun. I run the repair shop on level 3. I've been working with alien tech for about 15 years now, so I've seen a lot of weird stuff. But I've never seen anything like this." He reached toward one of the crystal shards, then stopped and looked at her with a question in his expression. Velith did not know why she nodded, but she did. Marcus picked up the fragment and held it up to the light, turning it slowly and watching the way the illumination passed through its structure. His eyebrows rose and his lips pursed in a silent whistle of appreciation. "This is alive," he said. "Or it was alive. I can see the growth rings like tree bark, and there are protein chains woven through the lattice that look almost like nerve tissue." He set the piece down gently, handling it with more care than Velith had expected from a human. "What happened to it?" "It died," Velith said flatly, "and it cannot be repaired. So there is no point in discussing it further." Marcus looked at her for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted from curiosity to something softer, something that might have been sympathy if she had been willing to recognize it. "Need that fixed?" he asked. Velith almost laughed, but the sound that came out was closer to a bitter exhale than anything resembling humor. "Human, this armor is older than your entire species' presence among the stars. It was grown from living crystal over generations, bonded to my bloodline through methods your people cannot begin to comprehend." She gathered the fragments back into her pouch with sharp, angry movements. "It is dead now, and no HFY crystalsmith in the Empire could revive it. What makes you think a mechanic from a backwater station could succeed where masters of the art would fail?" Marcus shrugged, and the casual gesture was so utterly human that Velith felt a flash of irritation at his refusal to be intimidated. "I don't know if I can fix it," he admitted, "but I won't know unless I try, and trying is kind of what I do." He stood and tucked his hands into his pockets, looking down at her with an expression that held no mockery or false confidence, only simple honest interest. "Mind if I take a look anyway?" Velith stared at him for a long moment, weighing the absurdity of his offer against the absolute certainty of her situations. She had nothing left to lose. "Very well," she said, rising from her chair and gathering her meager belongings. "Show me this repair shop of yours, Marcus-chan, and we will see how quickly your confidence turns to understanding." The human just smiled and turned toward the door. Waving for her to follow him into the crowded corridor, Bayan Velith did not know why she went with him. But something in his easy manner and unshakable certainty sparked a tiny ember of something she had thought extinguished forever. It might have been hope. Or it might have been simple curiosity about what kind of fool would look at the impossible and see only a problem, waiting to be solved either way. She followed him, and her life would never be the same. The repair shop on level 3 was everything Velith had expected from a human workspace, and somehow worse at the same time. Tools hung from hooks on every wall without any apparent system or organization. Cables snaked across the floor in tangled nests that seemed designed to trip the unwary, and workbenches covered with half-finished projects and mysterious components lined every available surface like the scattered thoughts of a madman made physical. There were handwritten notes pinned to boards and taped to monitors, diagrams sketched on scraps of paper and stuck to the walls with adhesive that had yellowed with age. And somewhere in the back, a machine hummed and clicked in a rhythm that sounded almost alive. Marcus walked through the chaos like it made perfect sense to him, stepping over cables and around stacked crates without looking down. His movements as natural as breathing. "Welcome to my kingdom," he said with a grin that held no embarrassment at the state of his domain. "It's not pretty, but I can fix just about anything in here." Velith stood in the doorway and felt her certainty about this foolish venture solidify into absolute conviction that she was wasting her time. "This is where you propose to repair armor that has been passed down through 12 generations of warriors?" she asked, her voice carrying the weight of centuries of tradition and pride. "In this pit of disorder and confusion?" Marcus cleared a space on his main workbench by the simple method of pushing everything to one side in a pile that immediately threatened to collapse. "The Kethvari forges must be something special," he said, ignoring her contempt with infuriating ease. "All crystal and light and perfect symmetry, right?" Velith thought of the sacred halls of making on her homeworld. The soaring chambers of pure white stone, where crystal smiths worked in silence and meditation, their movements precise and their minds focused on nothing but the bond between maker and material. "They are temples," she said quietly, "places of reverence where the art has been practiced for 10,000 years. Marcus nodded as if this confirmed something he had suspected. "And how many times have those temples fixed armor like yours after it died?" The question struck Velith like a blow, and she found herself without an answer. The truth was that living crystal armor did not get repaired after death, because it could not be repaired after death. It was simply the way of things, a fundamental law of the universe as unchangeable as the movement of stars. "Never," she admitted, "because it cannot be done." "Then maybe the temples aren't the right place to try," Marcus said. And there was no mockery in his voice, only a strange, gentle logic that made her feel off balance. "Maybe what you need is a pit of disorder and confusion, where nobody knows what's supposed to be impossible." He held out his hand, palm up. Waiting, Velith hesitated for a long moment, her fingers tight around the pouch that held the broken pieces of her heritage. Everything she had been taught screamed at her to walk away from this foolish human and his absurd confidence. But she had come this far, and there was nothing waiting for her at home except shame and silence. She placed the pouch in his outstretched hand. Marcus opened it carefully and spread the crystal fragments across his cleared workspace, his expression shifting from casual friendliness to focused intensity as he examined each piece. Pulled a magnifying lens on an articulated arm down from somewhere above and positioned it over the largest fragment, adjusting the light until the crystal's internal structure became visible. "Tell me about it," he said without looking up. "Everything you know." how it grows, how it bonds, why it dies. So Valeth told him. She explained that living crystal began as a seed, no larger than a grain of sand, planted in a special solution and nurtured for years until it grew large enough to be shaped. She described how the crystalsmith would spend decades attuning the growing armor to the electromagnetic field of its intended wearer, coaxing it to recognize and respond to that unique biological signature. She told him how the armor would continue to grow and adapt throughout its wearer's life, becoming stronger and more responsive with each passing year, and how it would be passed to the next generation upon death, learning to recognize the child as it had recognized the parent. And she explained how breakage severed that bond permanently, killing the crystal as surely as a blade through the heart. The death was not physical, but something deeper, a disruption of the connection that gave the armor its life and purpose. Marcus listened to everything without interrupting, his eyes still fixed on the fragments under his lens, his hands occasionally reaching for tools to probe and measure in ways that seemed random but were clearly driven by some internal logic she could not follow. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. So it's basically alive, he said finally, and it bonds with you through your bioelectric field. When the crystal breaks badly enough, that bond gets disrupted beyond the armor's ability to self-repair. And without the bond, it can't access the energy it needs to heal. Valeth blinked at the simple summary of concepts her people had spent millennia trying to articulate. That is a crude, but essentially accurate description. Yes, which means the crystal isn't really dead, Marcus continued, pulling open a drawer and rummaging through its contents. It's more like it's in a coma. The substrate is still intact. The protein chains are still there. It just can't reconnect to its power source. He pulled out a handheld device that looked like it had been assembled from the corpses of 3 different machines. Its casing cracked and held together with tape, but its display glowing with steady readouts. If I can figure out a way to restart that connection, or maybe simulate it long enough for the crystal to remember how to do it on its own, then there's no reason it couldn't heal itself. Valeth shook her head, torn between frustration and something that felt dangerously like hope. Human. Our crystal smiths have attempted exactly that approach for thousands of years. The bond between armor and wearer is not something that can be simulated or replicated through technology. Your crystal smiths tried with Kethvari technology, Marcus said, his attention already back on his work. Has anyone ever tried with human technology? No, Valeth admitted, because the idea is absurd. Your species has barely begun to understand the principles involved. Marcus looked up at her with a smile that held no offense at her dismissal of his people. Then you don't know it won't work, do you? Before she could respond, he had pulled out more equipment from various drawers and shelves around the workshop. A soldering iron, a collection of vials containing liquids of different colors, a bioelectric scanner that he claimed to have built himself from salvaged parts, and an assortment of tools she could not identify. I've been experimenting with synthetic protein matrices for about 5 years now, he explained as he arranged his workspace. Started because I was trying to repair organic components in Deshan life support systems. And those things are finicky about what materials they'll accept. He held up one of the vials, which contained a silvery substance that seemed to shift and flow on its own. This is my latest batch. It's designed to mimic biological electromagnetic signatures based on a template I provide, and it bonds with organic structures without triggering rejection responses. Valeth leaned forward despite herself, her eyes fixed on the strange liquid. You believe this substance could simulate my bond with the armor? Maybe, Marcus said honestly, or maybe it'll do nothing at all. But I've got ideas I want to try, and the worst case scenario is that your armor stays broken, which is where you're at right now anyway. He met her eyes, and for the first time, Valeth saw something beyond casual confidence in his expression. There was determination there. the kind of stubborn refusal to accept defeat that she had seen in warriors facing impossible odds. "I'm not promising anything," he said, "but I'm going to try, and I'm going to give it everything I've got. And if it doesn't work, then at least we'll know something new about how this crystal functions." Velith looked at the fragments of her ancestral armor spread across this human's cluttered workbench, then at the strange tools and mysterious substances he had assembled, and finally at Marcus himself standing in the middle of his chaotic kingdom with grease on his cheek and hope in his eyes. "Human," she said carefully, letting every word carry the weight it deserved. "Be careful. That armor has been in my family for 12 generations. And whatever happens, I will not have it treated with anything less than the respect it deserves." Marcus nodded, and his expression shifted to something serious and solemn that made him look like an entirely different person. "Then I'll treat it like it's been in mine," he said. "I promise." He turned back to his work, and Velith found a clear spot where she could sit and watch. She did not know if she believed in his chances, but she found that she wanted to, and for now, that was enough. For 3 days, Marcus worked on the armor, while Velith watched from her corner of the workshop, her amber eyes following his every movement with an intensity that would have made most beings uncomfortable. He did not seem to notice or care, lost in a world of measurements and calculations and small, careful adjustments that consumed his entire attention. The first day was devoted entirely to study. Mapped every fragment of crystal using equipment that ranged from standard scientific instruments to devices he had clearly built himself from salvaged parts and desperate improvisation. He measured the electromagnetic resonance of the dead material, traced the pathways of the protein chains woven through its structure, and compiled a database of information that grew larger with every passing hour. Velith answered his questions when he asked them, explaining nuances of crystal behavior that she had learned from her mother and grandmother. But most of the time she simply observed in silence. She had never seen anyone work the way Marcus worked. When Kethvari crystalsmiths approached their art, they did so with meditation and ritual, entering trances that allowed them to attune their consciousness to the living material they shaped. It was a spiritual practice as much as a technical one, requiring decades of training and an innate sensitivity that not everyone possessed. Marcus approached the problem like a mechanic diagnosing a broken engine. He poked and prodded and measured, muttering to himself about protein folding patterns and electromagnetic field coherence, scribbling notes on scraps of paper that he stuck to the wall beside dozens of others until the entire surface was covered with his cramped handwriting. He made no attempt to attune himself to the crystal or enter any kind of meditative state. Instead, he simply gathered data with the relentless determination of someone who believed that every problem had a solution if you just looked hard enough. It was the most alien approach to living crystal that Velith had ever witnessed, and she found herself fascinated despite her skepticism. On the second day, Marcus began his experiments. He started with the smallest fragments, pieces no larger than her fingernail that had broken off during the initial damage. These he subjected to various treatments using his synthetic protein matrix, carefully documenting the results of each attempt. Most of them failed. The crystal remained dark and lifeless no matter what he did, unresponsive to the electromagnetic fields he generated or the protein compounds he applied. Each failure made Velith more certain that this was a waste of time. But Marcus just shrugged and moved on to the next variation. "Science is mostly about learning what doesn't work," he said when she commented on his lack of frustration. "Every failed experiment is data. Data tells you where to look next." By the evening of the second day, he had a breakthrough. One of the tiny fragments flickered with a faint glow when exposed to a specific combination of his synthetic proteins and a low-frequency electromagnetic pulse. The light lasted only a fraction of a second before fading, but Marcus whooped with excitement and immediately began trying to replicate the result. Did you see that?" he demanded, his face lit up with joy that seemed entirely out of proportion to the brief flash of illumination. It responded, "The substrate is still viable. We just need to figure out how to sustain the reaction." Baelith leaned forward, her heart beating faster despite her attempts to maintain her composure. "That could have been a residual discharge," she said. "Dying cells sometimes produce similar effects as the last of their energy dissipates." "Could have been," Marcus agreed cheerfully, "but it wasn't. Look at the readings." He showed her the data from his scanner, pointing to patterns that meant nothing to her untrained eye but clearly held great significance for him. The protein chains in that fragment reorganized themselves in response to the stimulus. They tried to reform the bond. They just didn't have enough energy to complete the process. He was already reaching for more equipment, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. "If I can create a sustained field that mimics your bioelectric signature closely enough, and if I can provide the crystal with an external energy source while it rebuilds its internal pathways, then theoretically it should be able to restart the bonding process on its own." Baelith shook her head slowly, struggling to process what she was hearing. "You are proposing to restart a bond that has been severed for over a week using technology that has never been tested on living crystal." "Yep," Marcus said without hesitation. "The chances of success are astronomical." "Probably," he agreed. "But astronomical isn't the same as zero, and zero is what you've got right now." He looked at her with those strange human eyes that held no fear or doubt, only endless stubborn optimism. "What have you got to lose by letting me try?" She had no answer for that question. The third day was when everything changed. Marcus had spent the night refining his technique, and when Baelith returned to the workshop, after a few hours of restless sleep in the quarters he had arranged for her, she found him surrounded by an even greater mess than before. Tools and components covered every surface. Cables ran in every direction, and in the center of it all sat the largest fragment of her armor beneath a web of sensors and emitters that looked like something out of a fever dream. "I think I've got it," he said without looking up, his voice rough with exhaustion but vibrating with barely contained excitement. "I figured out why the bond breaks when the crystal shatters. It's not just the physical damage, it's the disruption of the standing wave pattern that the crystal uses to maintain coherence with its host." He pulled up a holographic display that showed a complex three-dimensional wave pattern. "Your bioelectric field produces a specific frequency that the crystal learns to resonate with over time. When the crystal breaks, the internal reflections that maintain that resonance get scrambled, and the crystal can't find the signal anymore." Baelith stared at the display, recognizing the underlying truth of what he was describing, even though the technical language was foreign to her. "The crystalsmiths speak of this as the song," she said quietly. "They say that broken armor can no longer hear its wearer's song." "Exactly," Marcus said. "And what I'm going to try is basically building a hearing aid." He gestured to the web of equipment surrounding the crystal fragment. "I've mapped your bioelectric signature using readings I took while you were sleeping. Sorry about that, by the way. And I've programmed this array to produce a field that matches your frequency exactly." He held up a small device that pulsed with soft light. "And this is the key. It's a micropulse generator that will feed the crystal a constant low-level current while the field is active, giving it the energy it needs to rebuild its internal pathways." Baelith looked at the arrangement of human technology surrounding the remains of her ancestral armor and felt a strange mix of emotions she could not name. "What do you need from me?" "Just sit here," Marcus said, pointing to a chair he had positioned near the workbench. "The closer you are, the stronger your natural field will be, and that should help the crystal lock onto the signal faster." She sat, and Marcus began activating his equipment with a series of switches and commands that seemed random, but were clearly part of a careful sequence. the room filled with a low humming sound, and the air around the crystal fragment began to shimmer with invisible energy. For several minutes, nothing happened. Lilith felt her brief spark of hope beginning to fade, replaced by the familiar weight of acceptance that she had carried since the battle in the hollow nebula. Then the crystal began to glow. It started as the faintest shimmer, barely visible in the bright lights of the workshop, but it grew stronger with each passing second. The glow spread from the center of the fragment outward, tracing the pathways of the protein chains like blood flowing through newly opened veins. Lilith's hand went to her chest involuntarily, pressing against the place where her armor had once rested. She could feel something, a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. "It's working," Marcus breathed, his eyes fixed on his readouts with an expression of pure wonder. "The crystal is rebuilding the resonance pattern. It's actually working." The glow intensified, and Valith watched as tiny crystalline threads began to grow from the edges of the fragment, reaching out like roots seeking water. They wove themselves together in patterns she recognized from the intact portions of her armor, forming structures that should have taken decades to develop. "That's impossible," she whispered, unable to find any other words. Marcus laughed, a sound of pure exhausted joy. "Impossible just means nobody's tried the dumb way yet." By the time the sun rose over Outpost Meridian, the fragment was no longer a fragment. It had grown into a small but complete section of living crystal armor, glowing with the soft inner light that Valith remembered from her childhood, when she had first been allowed to touch her mother's sacred plates, and it was reaching for the other fragments that still lay scattered across the workbench. Straining toward them with a hunger that was almost alive, Marcus looked at his creation with wonder and pride and utter bone-deep exhaustion. "Think we should let it keep going?" he asked. Valith could not speak. She could only nod as tears she had thought long dried began to fall from her eyes. Her armor was coming back to life. The fifth day dawned with Valith standing before a full-length mirror in Marcus's workshop. Unable to believe what she was seeing, her armor was whole, not just repaired or patched together, but whole in a way that seemed to defy everything she had ever been taught about the nature of living crystal. The plates fit together perfectly across her torso, their surfaces gleaming with the deep inner light that marked truly bonded armor. And she could feel them responding to her movements with a sensitivity that took her breath away. Seams where the fragments had rejoined were not invisible. They showed as thin lines of slightly different coloration, like scars on living flesh, but they were stronger than strong. Actually, Marcus had run tests on the repaired sections and found that the hybrid protein matrix he had woven through the rejoined crystal had created a reinforced structure that exceeded the original material's tensile strength by nearly 40%. The scaffold I used to help the pieces reconnect basically became part of the crystal's new internal architecture, he had explained, his voice slurred with exhaustion after 5 days of near constant work. "It's like how a bone heals stronger where it broke. Your armor learned from the repair and incorporated the new materials into its growth pattern." Valith ran her fingers over the surface of the plates, feeling the familiar warmth of living crystal responding to her touch. It sang against her skin, a sensation she had thought lost forever. And the song was different now. It was richer, deeper, carrying harmonics that had not been there before. The armor remembered the hands that had saved it. She turned to look at Marcus, who had finally collapsed onto a battered couch in the corner of his workshop and was watching her with heavy-lidded eyes and a tired smile. "You did something that should not be possible," she said, her voice thick with emotions she had no words to express. "You brought the dead back to life," Marcus shrugged, a gesture she had come to recognize as his default response to anything that made him uncomfortable. "I just gave it a jump start," he said. "The crystal did all the real work. It wanted to live. It just needed someone to show it how." Valith shook her head slowly. You do not understand what you have done. She crossed the room and knelt before him, a gesture of respect that she had never offered to anyone outside her own bloodline. Marcus's eyes went wide with surprise and something that looked almost like alarm. Human. Among my people, armor is not simply equipment or protection. It is identity and lineage and honor woven together into a physical form. She touched the plates covering her chest. When a warrior loses their ancestral armor, they are considered severed from their bloodline. They must renounce their name and rank, forbidden to speak of their family or claim any connection to the legacy their ancestors built. Marcus was sitting up now, his exhaustion forgotten as the weight of her words began to sink in. I was returning home to face that fate. Valith continued, to stand before the Council of Blades and confess that I had lost what 12 generations had entrusted to me. I would have become a ghost, a warrior without history, cast out from everything I had ever known. She met his eyes, those strange human eyes that held confusion and dawning understanding in equal measure. You have restored my place among my people, my family, my name, my purpose. Everything I thought I had lost when my armor shattered. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications of what she was telling him. I didn't know, he said finally. I mean, I knew it was important to you, but I didn't realize it was that important. Would it have changed anything if you had known? He thought about the question seriously, which Valith appreciated. She had learned over these 5 days that Marcus did not give careless answers when asked sincere questions. No, he said finally. I would have tried anyway. Maybe I would have been more nervous about screwing up, but I still would have tried. Valith smiled, and it felt strange on her face after so many days of grief and resignation. That is what I do not understand about your species, she said. You see something broken, and your first instinct is to fix it. Not to mourn it, not to accept it as the natural order of things, but to fix it. She stood and helped him to his feet. Noting how unsteady he was after so many days of working without proper rest. My people have had space travel for 15,000 years, she continued. We have built empires that span galaxies and developed technologies that approach the limits of what physics allows. But in all that time, we never once thought to try what you attempted. Because you knew it was impossible? Marcus guessed. Because we accepted that it was impossible, Valith corrected him. There is a difference. You humans have not been among the stars long enough to learn what is possible and what is not. And so you simply try everything. She paused, searching for words that could capture the realization that had been building in her mind over these long days of watching him work. It is a gift, she said finally. This blindness to limitation. You do not see the walls that contain the rest of us, and so you walk through them as if they were not there. Marcus laughed, a sound that was equal parts embarrassed and pleased. I mean, it's also why humans do a lot of really stupid things, he admitted. Not knowing what's impossible means we waste a lot of time trying stuff that genuinely can't work. But sometimes it does work, Valith said. And those times change everything. She looked around the cluttered workshop that had become her sanctuary over the past 5 days, seeing it now with different eyes. Where she had first seen chaos and disorder, she now recognized a different kind of order. One based not on tradition and hierarchy, but on function and adaptability. This room was a monument to human stubbornness, to the refusal to accept defeat, to the insistence that every problem was just a solution waiting to be discovered. I must return home soon, she said. The council will want to know what happened in the Hollow Nebula. And I have been away too long already, Marcus nodded. Then she saw something flicker across his face that might have been disappointment. Yeah, of course. I'm sure you've got important stuff to do. Valith reached into a pouch at her belt and withdrew a small crystal. One of the tiny fragments that had broken off during her battle and had not been needed for the repair. It glowed with the same inner light as her armor, attuned to her frequency through Marcus's techniques. "This is for you," she said, pressing it into his hand. "A piece of my bloodline's heritage. Keep it, and know that you will always have a friend among the HFY." Marcus looked at the crystal in his palm, then back at her with an expression she could not read. "I don't know what to say." "Say nothing," Valeth replied. "Words are inadequate for what you have done. Just know that I will remember, and I will make sure my people remember as well." She paused, considering what she was about to say and whether she had the right to say it. "Marcus-chan, when your species finally makes contact with the greater galaxy as a unified people, rather than scattered traitors and wanderers, the elder races will try to test you. They will see your youth and your chaos and your lack of tradition, and they will assume you are weak." She touched her armor again, feeling its steady pulse against her chest. "They will try to break you and diminish you, to force you into the patterns that they have established over millennia." Marcus's expression hardened slightly, the first hint of steel she had seen behind his easy smile. "And what should we do when that happens?" Valeth leaned forward and placed her hand on his shoulder, a gesture of respect between warriors that she had never before offered to someone outside her own kind. "Tell them to be careful," she said. "Tell them that humans do not know how to stay broken, and that anything they destroy you will simply rebuild stronger than before." She stepped back and turned toward the door, then paused one more time. "The galaxy has not seen anything like your species before," she said, "and I do not think it is ready for what you will become." Marcus stood in the doorway of his workshop and watched her walk away, the crystal fragment warm in his hand and her words echoing in his mind. He did not know what the future held for humanity or for the strange warrior he had spent 5 days helping. But he knew one thing for certain: he was glad he had asked. If she needed that fixed, it was the most human thing he could have done. And somehow that felt like exactly the right answer. The morning of Valeth's departure came too quickly, bringing with it a strange mix of emotions that neither of them knew how to address. Marcus stood in the docking bay of Outpost Meridian, watching as Valeth's ship completed its pre-flight checks with the mechanical efficiency of HFY engineering. It was a beautiful vessel, all sweeping curves and crystalline surfaces that seemed to drink in the light and release it in soft glowing patterns. He felt small standing next to it, aware for the first time in days of just how vast the gap was between his cluttered workshop and the empire that had built such wonders. Valeth emerged from the ship wearing her restored armor, and the sight of her made his breath catch in unexpected ways. She was magnificent, a warrior of an ancient bloodline, standing tall and proud with the evidence of his work gleaming across her chest. The scars where the fragments had rejoined were visible even from a distance, but they did not diminish her. If anything, they added to her presence, marks of survival that spoke of battles won against impossible odds. "Your ship is impressive," Marcus said as she approached. "I thought about asking if you needed any repairs, but I'm guessing HFY tech is a little beyond my usual work." Valeth's lips curved in the slight smile he had come to recognize as genuine amusement. "My vessel would not know what to do with your methods," she admitted. "It is designed to be maintained through traditional resonance techniques. Your creative approach to repair would likely cause it to have what I believe you call a nervous breakdown." Marcus laughed, and the sound seemed to brighten the sterile docking bay. "Fair enough. Some patients just aren't ready for experimental treatment." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, two beings from vastly different worlds who had somehow found common ground in the impossible task of bringing the dead back to life. "I have been thinking about what you did," Valeth said finally. "Not just the technical achievement, but the spirit behind it." She turned to face him fully, her amber eyes intense with an emotion he could not name. "Among my people, we have a saying: The river does not fight the mountain, it flows around. It means that wisdom lies in accepting the obstacles that cannot be moved and finding paths that do not require their removal. Marcus nodded slowly, recognizing the philosophy, even if it felt foreign to his human sensibilities. That's not really how humans approach things. No, Valith agreed. And I have spent 5 days watching you demonstrate exactly how different your approach is. When you saw my armor broken, you did not look for a path around the mountain. She paused, searching for the right words. You built tools to break the mountain apart and reassemble it in a shape that suited your needs better. Marcus shrugged uncomfortably under the weight of her observation. I just tried stuff until something worked. It wasn't that philosophical. That is precisely what makes it philosophical. Valith replied. You did not agonize over whether it was possible or proper or permitted. You simply began trying, and you kept trying until you succeeded, or until you had exhausted every option. She reached out and took his hand, pressing his palm against the crystal armor over her heart. He could feel it pulsing with warmth, alive in a way that still seemed miraculous. This is what humans have that the elder races lack, she said softly. This refusal to accept that any problem is truly unsolvable. It is maddening and inspiring in equal measure, and I believe it will change the galaxy in ways that none of us can predict. Marcus felt the pulse of the living crystal against his hand and remembered all the hours he had spent coaxing it back to life. It had seemed like a simple repair job at the time, just another broken thing waiting to be fixed. But standing here now, he understood that it had been something more. He had proven that the impossible was just the untried. And that was a lesson that extended far beyond one warrior's ancestral armor. There is something I must do before I leave, Valith said, releasing his hand and stepping back. A rite that has not been performed for an outsider in over 1,000 years. She drew herself up to her full height, towering over him with the dignity of centuries of tradition behind her. Marcus Chen of Earth, you have restored what was thought forever lost. You have given me back my name, my bloodline, and my place among my people through an act of skill and determination that defies the accepted wisdom of our age. Her voice took on a formal quality, the cadence of ritual language practiced for generations. By the authority vested in me as a warrior of the Serenkai bloodline and a commander in the Imperial Fleet, I name you Christican. From this moment forward, you are recognized as a member of our family in spirit, if not in blood. She placed her hand over her heart in a gesture that clearly carried deep significance. Should you ever have need of sanctuary among the Kethvari, speak my name and show them this. She touched one of the scars on her armor, the place where Marcus's synthetic protein matrix had woven itself into the crystal structure. They will know you by my mark, and they will treat you as one of our own. Marcus stood speechless, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was offering. He had grown up on stories of alien empires and their ancient traditions, but he had never imagined being made part of one. I don't know if I deserve that, he said finally. You do not get to decide what you deserve, Valith replied with a hint of her earlier sharpness. That is determined by your actions, and your actions have earned this honor. Accept it with grace. Human, Marcus found himself smiling despite the formality of the moment. Yes, ma'am. Valith's stern expression cracked, and she laughed with genuine warmth. You are impossible. I prefer improbable, he replied. Sounds more optimistic. They walked together to the entrance of her ship, neither of them willing to extend the goodbye any longer than necessary. There were words that could have been said, feelings that could have been explored, but both of them knew that such things would only make the parting harder at the threshold of her vessel. Valith turned back one final time. Marcus Chen, she said, her voice carrying across the docking bay with the authority of a commander addressing her troops. When your kind finally make contact with the greater galaxy as a unified people, the elder races will try to test you. He nodded. Remembering her words from the day before, they will see your chaos, and your youth and your stubborn refusal to accept the rules that govern the rest of us. And they will assume that these things make you weak. She paused. And when she continued, her voice was softer, but somehow more intense. They will try to break you the way my armor was broken, expecting you to accept the damage as permanent and irreparable. Her hand moved to rest on the scarred plates over her heart. Tell them to be careful. Marcus held her gaze across the growing distance between them. Why? Layla smiled, and it was the smile of a warrior who had seen the impossible proven possible. Because humans do not stay broken, she said. And the tools they build to fix themselves have a way of reshaping everything around them. She turned and walked into her ship. And the door closed behind her with the soft hiss of sealing atmosphere. Marcus stood alone in the docking bay as the vessel powered up, its crystalline hull beginning to glow with the light of engines older than his civilization. He watched it lift from the deck and glide toward the bay doors. Moving with a grace that seemed almost organic at the edge of the void, it paused. And for just a moment, a pulse of light rippled across its surface. He chose to believe it was a farewell. Then it was gone, vanishing into the stars with a speed that made human ships look like children's toys. Carrying Vela Serenkai back to her empire and her destiny, Marcus watched the empty space where she had been for a long time, turning the small crystal fragment over and over in his fingers. It was warm against his skin, still attuned to Violet's frequency. A piece of her lineage that she had trusted him to keep. He thought about what she had said, about humans and their refusal to accept the impossible, about the elder races and their inevitable tests. He thought about all the broken things waiting to be fixed in his workshop. Then Marcus Chan, newly named Christikin of the Serenkai bloodline, walked back to his cluttered domain and started looking for his next impossible problem. The galaxy was vast and ancient, full of things that were considered beyond repair, and humanity was just getting started.